So tell me about the issue the how difficult it is to get accurate data as the deal changes and morphs and moves over time.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting because data really is one of those processes, especially when you're doing underwriting, where trash in, trash out. And what you're trying to do is, as an underwriter, is really refine the data where it's possible, and then make sure that as you translate data from one technology or one component to another, there's no errors in the entry of that data. The magnitudes of getting that wrong is, it just feeds into a further step down the line, and having to go back and correct an error or a mistake can really change the dynamics of the deal, especially when you're looking at the entering of a cash flow statement, manually enter a cash flow statement. An error in numbers can result in magnitudes of issues down the line, especially when you look at the debt underwriting process or the acquisition process, and you're trying to tackle valuation, especially. And so ways that the models are typically built with uh, checkpoints, right? Where you go back through and you take a look at the NOI number, that's the same NOI number that I have here, et cetera. And you kind of do these rudimentary checks as you go through your underwriting process. And what that ends up doing is it ends up adding time
Hmm.
into the process, right? So I upload the cash flow statement into, call it Argus or my model. Then now I have to go back and check again to make sure I got that right, right? And it's not just, oftentimes it's not just the NOI or the EGI line or what that recovery line is. It's literally now I have to go back and check each individual expense. Right? If that number is wrong, I now have to go dig down even further. And so that all that builds up, right? So that becomes 30 minutes to enter the information, 10 minutes to review, right? And you do that over the course of a week, you're talking about an hour and 3 or 4 hours a week that you're just doing checking of what you've already entered in. And so what are utilizing Copa technology allows you to complete that task in a very truncated period, right? Copa is able to gather the data that you need and put it in the various forms that you need in a way where the systematic rechecking is reduced or eliminated. And ultimately, that allows you to put more time into other aspects of your business. So I think that kind of touches on um, just the high level portion in the underwriting process. Then there's the inconsistencies of data where you're looking at the actual vendor reports and getting that information and those assumptions into the memo, being able to track down the source of that information, right? And at those report change, you have to constantly go back and update the information that you had. So let's say you get a new rent roll, right? You looked at a deal 4 months ago, you get a new rent roll. Now you're actually changing individual tenants' names, you're changing streams versus being able to have that process automatically updated for you as you work through the process. So, that's just the underwriting. And then
Well,
there's
before
still
even before
data.
that, well, before that, now the other question is, how often have you had to work on teams when multiple people were doing the underwriting, and there,
Exactly.
and now you have issues where someone somewhere input some information incorrectly, but no one knows where to find it, and everyone's blaming each other. Have you ever
Ex-
seen, sorry, that might be leading the cart leading the horse, but
Yeah, no, there are periods where you have portfolio deals, right? And it might be nationwide or different geographies. So you have people working in the same models, right? And that can lead to model breakage, right? And so now you have, if you're on the East Coast and you're working on a model, you have no idea what the person on the West Coast did the night before. And so you're having to triage the model to understand why these numbers have changed, right? And oftentimes those models are live. So those numbers are changing on a consistent basis. And not understanding who's working on what part of the model can be problematic, right? Oftentimes companies would try to locate the model in one office and have one lead person on the model, right? But you're still having the different offices inputting data points in the model that can lead to some error, right? I always think that the elimination of manual entry in any form helps, and that's why you see, in this space now, because of the different technologies that are utilized across the board, you're now seeing people creating ways for one technology to talk to another technology. Um, but even then, transfer of data is not always 100%. The way one technology may look at something and classify it as something is not the way the other side of the business or another technology is going to classify that particular item. And so you have this discrepancy in reporting, which again leads you to have to manually go back in and check. Um, and then with some of the existing technology, the ways that you change the data can be problematic, right? So you build out a whole model in whatever system that you're using, and then you go back and say, okay, this tenant no longer exists, this relationship, but so you delete that particular tenant or you delete that income stream, um, but those expenses still sit there that are tied to that tenant. That market analysis, that market profile, or that analysis that you were doing earlier still sits in the model, tied now to an absent tenant, right? And so you get this model now that has, issues in it, and you have to triage it. Oftentimes, you may have to break the model completely in order to figure out what the issue is. Time and days, let alone calling customer service and having to go through all that. Um, so, these are just issues that I know I have experienced, and my other colleagues in various industries, various real estate related industries have experienced it as well.
And then one other question for you, just from the perspective of there's always churn within real estate shops, and there's
Mm-hmm.
always people trying to come in learning what to do,
Mm-hmm.
and people have to be managed and taught what is correct, and sometimes you
That's right.
think they put something incorrect, and then something is like, wait, you put in what? I've been
Yeah,
making my
exactly.
based on what? Right? So I won't ask for any funny stories, but just I guess talk a little bit through the process of like ensuring accuracy when you're working even with someone else on the same deal as you
Right.
go back and check them, and how much that slows you down, or and then some people that just aren't able to. Some people just aren't good at data entry. Like that's not their bag.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky sword, right? Because you need, um, it's a tricky sword meaning that it's double edged, right? You need an analyst associate. You need somebody to come in, help you sift through all the data points and all the data that you have. But with that is typically someone that's not as skilled as the person that's doing the final review or doing the actual strategic pullout of what that data actually means, right? What we should be presenting to the IC or the investment committee or whatever review board that you have for a deal. Um, and what you're trying to do is simultaneously train the person as they're doing the work, right? So that uphill battle really depends on the quality of the person that you have in that seat. And that can vary from seat to seat, which means as you're working on deals, each individual person doing the data entry is different. And you're trying to get some kind of uh, common level where you can say, okay, now I at least know I need to focus on checking these things, that this is going to be at least somewhat accurate. But to your point, that training process is 6 to 12 months. Ideally, if somebody's had multiple internships over the course of their collegiate or high school career, or have a lot of other experience with data entry, that might be truncated to 3 to 4 months, but they're still learning the intricacies of the model, and that's only on the data entry component. That's not on how to manipulate the data once it's in the model, right? That's a whole nother subset of learning that also creates inaccuracies. Um, and so just having a system that uh, that basically takes in the data on your behalf, and then you can preset how it's manipulated so that you have a common way of reviewing speeds up the process considerably.
And the last thing when it comes to data accuracy from your career, what happens when there's a deadline and the deadline is unexpected and it needs to get done, the hell or high water?
Yeah,
What have you ever seen anything ever go sideways with inaccurate, but was thought was accurate at one point, but wasn't able to go be checked, and that may end up in a credit memo and ICM.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are things that you never want to see happen. You never want to see. Accuracy is non-negotiable, right? You never want to see get your IC memo and you look at it and you spot the error. And if you're spotting the error, most likely anybody in a seat above you is going to zero in on that error immediately. It's not even reading the memo, it's page 4. Why is this assumption here? And it's circled in red. That doesn't tie out to the assumption that you wrote on. Or even worse, um, the assumptions that are written in the IC memo don't match what's being presented in the model image. And that is related to something, data point, or some issue changing and it not flowing back through the whole process of the underwriting and the updating. I see now going to your point about two different people working on a deal. You have a discussion and somebody with the team, call it two different analysts, the associated analysts, you tell somebody, okay, the assumption should be X, Y, and Z. They go and make it in the model. And because of the deadline, they just print out the IC memo without change going back and saying, oh, I got to change this in the IC memo. So you're looking at a disconnect. And that is the worst situation to be in when facing a client, the worst situation to be in when you're facing an internal approval group, because now the credibility, not only on this deal, but on deals moving forward are now in question, right? These oftentimes, this is regardless of the dollar amount, right? This could be a single family deal that's $250,000, right? All the way up to your high pension fund, regardless of that, if you see somebody making a mistake that doesn't fit, there's an error, you're not going to trust that person moving forward to do that work, right? And so there's a redundancy that's built in consistently in the process, and that just takes a lot of time and heavy lifting, which is why you hear people saying, "Oh, I worked till 3 a.m. on this deal." Well, a lot of that is redundancy checking, right? You did the data set, you did the initial write up. Now it goes to somebody else who reviews it. They make some changes. It comes back to you. You make some updates. It goes back to them. Then it goes to a third person that reviews it maybe that morning. You come in, right? You have the meeting at 1. You might have the first review at 8. There's another set of changes that flows all the way back through the system, right? Then it's being recycled again at 10, maybe one last touch at 12, and you're scrambling to print everything out by 1. And the worst case scenario is at the checks at 10 or 12, you find an error in the data set that changes how you would be presenting the deal in its entirety. Um, and it could be as simple, there are no multiple stories, but it could be as simple as somebody labeled something as an operating expense to be a capex, right? Or it could be something as the appraiser made a simple mistake in the way a number was written, or a number was basically written backwards or something,
Yep.
and nobody checked the math in the appraiser's report.
Yep.
So now you're using a cap rate or you're using a valuation that has an error in it. And believe me, the people that have been doing this for years will look at your report and spot that error immediately. right?
Yep.
And it can be devastating for somebody that's entry level or even mid level in their career. These are just things are errors that shouldn't happen, but things you have to live
1,000%. So, with Copa being able to do data ingestion and then obviously making everything super accurate, how would that have changed your career if you had that earlier on?
through. So there are a couple of things right off the bat, right? So um, you imagine instead of one time, right? So you get time back, and that allows you earlier on in your career to be doing more impactful things that add value to the transaction. And what I mean by that is typically you're doing the grunt work for the first year and a half to 2 years to understand the model, right? Now you can spend the first 6 months just understanding the model and less on the grunt work that you need to do to get the data entry. That's the first thing, which makes the second half of your first year much more impactful because now you're able to manipulate the data and provide scenarios, come up with sensitivity, start training yourself on a strategy and a high level thought to make you more valuable for your associate, assistant VP, vice president, and all. They're just ricocheting up the chain, right? Oh, this person is doing quality work. Now, when I see it, it's just a quick review. But what's interesting about Cobra is it flags the issues earlier on in the process, right? So now the issues can be taken care of at the initial stage. So if you think about how you're working through a manufacturing line, you're catching the error at the very beginning so that it doesn't flow through the system. So the quality of the data and the quality of the product that you're getting further down the system, it's just higher level, right? And it shortens the deal time entirely because now the manipulating and the strategy on how to present the deal can be done at earlier stages in the process, right? And that allows you to also, if you're managing the business from an operational cost perspective, right? Now you're shrinking the overhead costs that you need in order to get an individual transaction done. The second thing is um, I think I mentioned the manipulating of data and the strategy aspect of it. Now you're able to actually turn your presentation around much quicker. Let's say you get a new information and data, right? That data set that you're now entering in flows completely through from your model to your IC memo, right? So now everything is in one place. You change it here, the rest of changes throughout the reporting. And you can always customize your IC report and your output however you want it to look. And that allows everything to just flow systematically through the process. Um, you know, what I would say is that it makes each step much more reliable.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
that, again, we spoke before on underwriting and managing risk, right? The more reliable each process is, the less risk. You can identify things quicker, you can mitigate things quicker, you can get back to the client faster, and work with the client on ways to adjust the deal or you know modify the pricing.
Mhm. And I guess in the last permutation of that is, or question that maybe you want to consider when thinking about doing, especially when you have a large deal load, if you have 5 or 6 deals you're working on at the same time, and they have different deadlines, particularly the sell side, but both sides, the buy side, sell side, whatever, and you stay up till 3 a.m. on one deal, and then the next day you have a different deal that you also have to be on because you want to be back in the office by 9, and you're tired, and you're doing your
Yeah,
best, but eventually, like
so,
around noon, you start to drag.
yeah,
Um, what would this have done? What does the impact do you think of having the chance that, hey, look, this stuff is right. I know that it's right. I can check that it's right. I verify that it's right. And I leave the office at 9 or 10 or even 6 or 7. And then you wake up with fresh eyes to do the next deal the next day.
yeah. There's something about again, this is going to sound cliche, but it's something about seeing the forest versus just seeing a tree, right? When you're in the data set and you're doing a manual data entry and you've been doing it for a long period of time, you may have four deals and you're doing data entry across four deals, right? All those deals are in play. You finally got the deal. You verified, you checked everything. You started at 8:30 and it might now be 10:30, 11, and you're now going to the next stage of the process, right? That builds up over days, right? Including, so now that bleeds into weekends, right? I got to come in the weekend to make sure everything is ready by the deadline that I need on Monday or Tuesday, and so forth. Um, the stress load is one thing, right? Personal health, mental health, all that aspect of it. That's real. It's real. Um, but most importantly, on the work quality product, um, you're just not as attentive
Hmm.
to one, the feedback that you're receiving, right? Your speed starts to deteriorate.
Hmm.
Right? No matter how thick you are with modeling on Excel or whatever the system that you're using, that speed starts to erode at a certain period of time, right? Um, a lack of sleep, uh, food, desire to just have caffeine function escalates. Okay? Drinking coffee at 3 in the morning is not fun.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, like, you know, you start your performance starts to erode drastically, right? And there's a critical point where you just mentally start to shut off, and you
Yep.
just start to operate as, okay, I just need to get this done
Yep.
so somebody else can do their work, and becomes the, a push to get things done, not a push to get quality product
Yep.
provided, right? And what we're trying to do, or at least what I think is a major factor of what we're doing at Copa, is not really pushing quantity so much as quality. But a side effect of having higher quality faster is that we can meet the quantity number, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, to your point, um, those are days that you never forget, right? Uh,
Or you do
they
because you can't remember it. That happened, especially if it happened
That's
like 2 days in
exactly
a
it.
row.
That's right. That's right. It blurs. It blurs. It starts to blur. I mean, it starts to blur, and a month has gone by,
Mm-hmm.
and you've literally been in the same seat
Hmm.
for 14, 16 hours a day,
Yeah.
um, 6, 7 days a week. Uh,
You look out from your office building, which you're probably in, and realize that you're like, it's like, are my contacts dry? Do I still have them in? Because the lights outside look real blurry at around 3 in the
yeah,
morning. Yeah.
yeah.
Well.
There's something. It's actually there's a funny story. We used to do something called a cycle. The cycle is when you work late, really late. You've done your seamless, ordered your meals, whatever. You worked really late, and whatever it may be. Deal, client prospectus, putting together marketing material for the next deal. While one thing to point out is while you're working on deals, you're also prepping the next deals, and
Mhm.
you're prepping marketing material, and you're prepping closing,
Mhm.
and you're prepping transfer of information from a deal that's closed to another department in your business, right?
And all with
So,
different bosses that all think they're the most special and most important.
you know, they they demand your time equally, or some will demand it more than others, right?
Mhm.
And now you're stuck making a priority list, really a priority list of what needs to be completed independent of the expectations of your higher ups, right? Which also poses its own um, political management requirements in office, right? Um, what Cobra can do in that situation is one, you've already gotten some of your time back from the underwriting and the error checking, and the quality data is now enhanced, and the IC memo is much faster. It can be Changes can be simulation scenario changes can be built into the system, which allow you to kind of have create a package that you can manipulate a lot faster. So that's one. Second is those priorities that you need to manage the transfer of data now happens within Copa's hub, right? So your asset management platform is going to be coming further down the line. The information shifts. The deal is closed. The information is dispersed automatically as it's needed to whatever department that's receiving it. They live on the system as well. It's a collective hub, okay? A hub where everybody can operate from. And so that makes the communication almost seamless in the circle, in the life cycle of whatever that project may be, which also allows um, the management of expectations from a deal perspective to be done well. Now, the story I was mentioning about the cycle is, you work late until, you know, call it midnight, 2, 3 in the morning, right? You would go home in time to sleep for 2 hours, shower, and then come right back into the office, right? So it's called a cycle, right? Because it's like you're just cycling home and cycling back. You're not really doing anything at home. You're not really doing anything personal. You're just changing clothes, quick shut eye, shower, and back in. And there are people that are savvy that would literally keep the same shirt and tie in the office and like different jackets, right? And they'll just wear the shirt. They just take off their shirt and tie, hang it up, put on their outside clothes, run home, sleep, shower, come out with outside clothes with like different slacks
Yep.
and just a white shirt on, and then put
Yep.
the same shirt on, maybe
Yep.
switch a tie with a
Yep.
different jacket. But you'd be in their booth, and there'd be like literally 4 or 5 jackets hanging there with
Yeah.
like 2 or 3 different ties, and they just combination, right? They're like, look, it doesn't make sense for me to take this all home because my dry cleaners is like 2 blocks away from work. So yeah, and it's different. It's different in different places. But even in smaller shops where the deal volume is low, it's lower. Um, you know, Copa's advantage uh, allows you to increase the quantity of deals that you do and look at more scenarios to find better solutions for your clients.
1,000%.